Maricel Varguez had no idea her simple solo trip to India would turn into a nightmare one, where every smile felt staged and every stranger seemed to know more about her than they should. Because the moment she met Arvind Solanki, the charming coordinator who insisted he could take care of everything, her fate quietly shifted. And while Priya Nandesh, the cafe owner with eyes like CCTV cameras, noticed something was terribly off, Inspector Raghav Menon was already connecting clues that pointed to a chilling truth. Even Javed Rahmani, the silent driver who rarely spoke, carried secrets that could save or destroy Maricel. And when Risha Khatkar, a wandering backpacker, crossed paths with her, she unknowingly stepped into a story darker than any tourist warning. What happened next would freeze every nerve in your body. Vargas had always been known for her quiet strength. At 53, she had spent years working long shifts in Manila, saving whatever she could so she might one day see the world beyond her small apartment window. She had raised 2 nieces, helped her sister through illness, and put her own dreams aside more times than she could count. When her life finally slowed down, she decided it was time to give herself the peace she had postponed for so long. She wanted to travel somewhere beautiful and ancient, somewhere she could feel the history beneath her feet. India captured her imagination instantly. She read travel blogs, watched videos, followed the stories of people who walked through its temples and crowded bazaars. The idea of going alone didn't frighten her. Instead, it felt freeing. When she booked her flight, she imagined the entire journey unfolding with joy. She packed lightly but carefully, choosing clothes she felt comfortable in, and added a new journal to record moments she hoped would stay with her forever. Her nieces were proud of her decision, but Maricel didn't tell them much about the exact plans. She wanted to keep her trip simple and without pressure. What she didn't know, or even consider, was that someone she had never met had already taken an interest in her trip long before she stepped into the airport. The flight to New Delhi was long but calming. Maricel stared at the clouds and felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt since she was young. When the plane touched down, she smiled to herself. A chapter of her life was opening, and she was ready to walk straight into it. Her guest house was small but charming, located near a quiet street filled with shops. She loved how people greeted her with warm smiles, although she noticed some stared at her longer than she expected. She assumed it was just curiosity. During her first walk in the bustling market, she felt someone's presence behind her. Each time she paused to take a photo or admire a colorful stall, she sensed a figure shifting several feet away. She turned once, but whoever it was melted into the crowd quickly. The moment felt strange, but she brushed it off. It was her first day, and she didn't want to create fear inside her mind. She chalked it up to nerves and continued sightseeing. Later that evening, she returned to her room feeling both excited and slightly unsettled. She opened her suitcase and noticed a small item she didn't remember placing on top her scarf, folded differently than how she had packed it. It looked as if someone else had handled it. She told herself she must have moved it without thinking earlier. She didn't want to believe that anyone had entered her room. She took a shower, wrote a few lines in her journal about the colors and smells of the city, and tried to sleep. Just as she was drifting off, her phone buzzed. A message appeared from a name she didn't recognize: Arvind Solanki. It contained the full schedule of a guided tour she had never booked, including pickup times and locations. The message seemed professional, though oddly detailed. She wondered if her guest house had signed her up without informing her. She placed the phone aside, planning to ask about it in the morning. A thin sense of unease settled over her, but she tried to ignore it. Outside, the hallway of the guest house remained unusually quiet. The air felt heavy. Unknown to her, a shadow stood on the street below, watching the window of her room. The same figure that had followed her earlier now lingered, waiting patiently as if tracking her every move. Maricel slept, unaware that the simple trip she had looked forward to for so long had already begun to twist into something far more dangerous. And as her breathing settled into a soft rhythm, the person watching her stepped back into the darkness, planning the next move with chilling precision. The next morning arrived with a brightness that felt heavier than comforting. Maricel tried to shake off the uneasy feeling from the strange message she had received the night before. She convinced herself that it might have been a booking error from the guest house or a random scam. Still, something about the message lingered in her thoughts like a quiet echo she couldn't ignore. She stepped outside into the warm sunlight, hoping a good breakfast would ease her mind. She walked toward a small cafe a few streets away, a place she had noticed the previous day for its colorful signs and inviting smell of baked bread. The cafe owner, Priya Nandesh, greeted everyone who entered with a polite nod. Priya had a habit of observing people carefully, not out of suspicion, but out of genuine interest. When Maricel approached the counter, Priya immediately sensed something unusual about her own unsettled energy, a kind of silent fear hiding behind tired eyes. Maricel picked a small table near the window where she could watch the morning traffic. As she ate, she saw the same car she had noticed yesterday. It was an older vehicle with faint lettering on the door that read Solanki Tours. The letters were barely visible, as if someone had tried to remove them but didn't finish the job. Inside the car sat a driver with a rigid posture, his face expressionless. This was Javed Rahmani, though Maricel didn't know his name yet. He sat motionless, hands on the steering wheel, staring at her cafe window with eyes that made the air around her turn cold. Priya also noticed the car. She kept glancing outside while pretending to clean the counter. She had lived in the area long enough to recognize when something didn't fit. People rarely waited inside their cars unless they had someone to pick up, and no one spent this long sitting perfectly still. The driver's intense focus on Maricel felt wrong. When Maricel left the cafe, she tried to ignore the strange feeling spreading through her chest. She told herself that cities often had people waiting in cars, maybe for a job or a friend. Yet as she walked farther down the street, she sensed the car rolling slowly in the same direction. It didn't follow too closely. It kept a distance just long enough to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to track her. She quickened her steps, pretending to look interested in a shop window, so she could turn her head without seeming suspicious. The car was still there. Determined not to let fear control her trip, Maricel continued her sightseeing plan. She visited markets, temples, and busy streets, taking photos and writing small notes in her journal. But no matter where she went, she felt the weight of being watched. Sometimes she caught the reflection of the same car in glass doors. Sometimes she noticed a shadowy figure wearing a cap, lingering at the edge of her vision. She thought maybe she was imagining things, but deep down, she knew something was slowly tightening around her. When she returned to the guest house that evening, the building felt strangely different. The hallway lights flickered, as if they had been tampered with. A piece of paper was tucked under her door. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart racing. Inside was a simple map, marked with an X, at a lonely location near the river. Under the X, a time was written, 11 p.m. No explanation. No name, nothing else. She placed the map on the small desk and sat on the edge of her bed, trying to calm her breathing. Why would anyone send her a map? Why that time? And who would know her room number? While she was deep in thought, a sudden thud echoed through the hallway. It wasn't loud, but sharp enough to freeze her in place. She waited for footsteps or voices, but none came. Only silence. What she didn't know was that earlier that day, someone had entered her room when she was out. They hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't broken anything. They had simply observed her belongings and touched just enough to leave a silent message. She was no longer traveling alone. Outside, under the dim glow of a street lamp, the car with Solanki Tours waited again, engine running softly. The driver stared at her window with an unreadable expression. The game had already begun, and Maricel was now caught in the center of a plan she did not understand. The dawn of the next day arrived quietly, with a pale orange glow spreading across the sky. Most guests at the hostel were still asleep, but Maricel was already awake. She had barely slept through the night. The map left under her door had haunted her thoughts, pulling her mind into a restless cycle of fear and curiosity. She couldn't understand why it was sent to her or what the marked location meant. The more she stared at it, the more she felt drawn to it. It was as if someone had planted the perfect seed of uncertainty inside her. She moved slowly and carefully, packing her bag as if she were preparing for something unknown. She didn't want anyone to see her leaving earlier than usual, though she didn't know who she was hiding from anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her journal inside the bag. It was the only place she felt safe enough to pour her thoughts into, yet even that didn't seem to offer comfort now. A few rooms away, another traveler, Risha Khatkar, was sitting by the hostel window drinking tea. Risha often woke early to catch the sunrise. She noticed Maricel walking down the corridor, clutching her bag tighter than someone normally would for a morning outing. Risha didn't know Maricel well, but she recognized the expression on her face, an expression that looked like she was leaving for something she didn't want to face. Maricel didn't make eye contact with anyone, and she moved with a quiet determination that felt heavy with worry. Security cameras later showed Maricel stepping outside the hostel at exactly 5:12 a.m. She looked around cautiously, scanning both sides of the street before crossing. She wasn't being followed, at least not visibly. Still, she walked faster than her usual pace. The city around her was still waking up. Vendors were preparing their stalls. Stray dogs wandered lazily, and the early morning breeze carried a faint chill. None of it eased the weight Maricel carried inside her chest. Her destination was the old railway bridge marked on the map. The bridge had a reputation among locals abandoned, isolated, and rarely visited except by morning joggers. Maricel didn't know any of this. She only knew it was the only clue she had. As she approached the bridge, her phone buzzed once. Then it switched off by itself. She hadn't touched it. She pressed the power button, but nothing happened. It was as if the device had been remotely drained of its life. The timing was too precise, too intentional. This moment would later become one of the strangest details of her entire disappearance. At 5:34 a.m., Maricel walked beneath the bridge according to the last camera that captured her. That was the final moment anyone saw her. Later that day, the car belonging to Javed Rahmani was spotted near the same area. The sighting came from a street camera positioned far from the bridge, showing only the back of the vehicle. Javed would eventually deny being anywhere near the location. But investigators discovered that he had erased his phone's tracking history shortly after sunrise. His explanation for doing so kept changing each time he was questioned, deepening the uncertainty surrounding him. Back at the hostel, Maricel's bed remained untouched. Her belongings were still arranged neatly, except for one unsettling detail. Her pillow carried a faint scent of perfume. She didn't use. The smell was subtle but present enough to raise questions. Someone had been in her room again, someone who had no reason to be there after she left. The scent did not match any cleaning chemicals used by the hostel staff. When the hostel manager reviewed security footage, he noticed that during the night, the hallway camera had briefly flickered off for 34 seconds. The lights remained stable, but the camera feed disappeared. When it resumed, a shadow could be seen moving out of frame. It wasn't clear who it belonged to, but it was enough to suggest that someone had entered Maricel's room intentionally and without being detected. Risha, the backpacker, later recalled the look on Maricel's face and regretted not checking on her. She didn't know that Maricel's disappearance would soon become one of the most alarming cases in the region, drawing attention from locals and authorities alike. By the time the sun fully rose, Maricel had vanished without a trace. The city continued its routine, unaware that an ordinary traveler had slipped out of its grasp into complete silence. And for the first time, the invisible presence that had been following her no longer needed to hide. Because Maricel had already stepped exactly where they wanted her to go. Inspector Raghav Menon had worked on dozens of missing person cases in his career. But something about Maricel Varguez's disappearance felt different from the moment he received the report. Most missing travelers left behind some trace of phone call, a confused message, a witness who saw panic in their eyes. But Maricel had vanished with a level of silence that suggested planning, timing, and someone watching her every move from the moment she arrived in India. He began his investigation the same morning her case was filed. The first place he visited was the hostel where Maricel had stayed. The staff looked confused, insisting that she was quiet, polite, and gave no impression she might leave without warning. The inspector found the faint scent left on her pillow unsettling. It was floral, expensive, and unlike anything the hostel staff used. It was a scent that didn't belong in that room. That detail felt small, but to Raghav, it was a thread worth pulling. Next, He reviewed the hallway camera footage that captured the 34-second blackout. The brief disappearance of the video had no technical explanation. Someone had likely tampered with the wiring. Not to shut the camera off completely, but to make the interruption subtle, barely noticeable, unless someone watched closely. When the footage resumed, the shadowy figure that slipped out of view moved with confidence, as if they belonged there. It didn't look like a panicked intruder. It looked like someone who knew the blind spots. From there, the inspector visited the cafe where Maricel spent her morning before disappearing. Priya Nandesh, the owner, immediately recognized his seriousness and offered the CCTV footage she had saved. She explained how she had noticed the car parked outside, and how the driver seemed to watch Maricel without any attempt to hide his interest. Her intuition, sharpened by years of meeting strangers, told her something was wrong. The footage gave Raghav his first solid visual clue. The old vehicle with the faded lettering Solanki. Tours matched the description seen in multiple street cameras across the city. Inside it, the same driver appeared again and again, Javed Rahmani. Raghav dug into Javed's background and found troubling details. Javed had been questioned in another missing person case months earlier, though nothing had been proven. His phone records also revealed recent contact with a man named Arvind Solanki, the same name that appeared on the strange message Maricel received. When Raghav studied the message, he noticed something even more disturbing. The message was precise. It contained her full name, her room number, and a tour plan she'd never signed up for. The level of detail suggested that someone had access to her personal information. This meant Maricel wasn't just a random target. Whoever reached out to her had been watching her closely from her booking details to her arrival at the guest house. As the investigation deepened, Raghav traced every location Maricel had visited based on camera records. Her steps formed a pattern, a subtle guiding path that led her closer each day to the old railway bridge. It wasn't coincidence. Someone had been manipulating her environment, leaving clues and creating tension that pushed her in the direction they desired. The map left under her door confirmed this. It was not an invitation. It was a trap. But the most chilling moment for the inspector came when Priya provided one more piece of footage. It showed the reflection of a person standing across the street. Their face was mostly covered by a long scarf, and their posture suggested close monitoring. They weren't watching the cafe. They were watching Maricel specifically. That reflection became a turning point in the case. Raghav traced the scarfed figure across multiple camera angles. Their trail led to a rundown guest house at the edge of the city, a place that had been abandoned for months. Inside, what he discovered froze the entire investigation. The walls of one room were covered with photo tourists from different countries, all traveling alone. Their names, flight numbers, and hotel bookings were pinned neatly under each picture. Maricel's photo was at the center. A red circle had been drawn around her face. The date beneath it was from weeks before she booked her flight. Someone knew she was coming. Someone had chosen her long before she set foot in India. And with each new discovery, the inspector realized something that sent a chill through his spine. This wasn't a simple disappearance. It was part of something much larger, something organized, something hidden in plain sight. And Maricel was now at the heart of a network that thrived on people vanishing without leaving a trace. The discovery at the abandoned guest house changed the course of the entire investigation. Inspector Raghav Menon gathered every clue, every image, every written detail left behind. The room filled with photographs was not just strange, it was horrifying. This wasn't the work of an impulsive criminal. It was the work of someone who studied their targets long before they entered the country, someone who prepared each step with patience and purpose, someone who saw travelers as entries in a list, not as human beings with families and lives. As the crime unit sifted through the room, one object caught everyone's attention, a heavy metal trunk half buried beneath torn blankets. Dust covered its surface, but the lock was new. When investigators forced it open, they froze. Inside were passports, dozens of them, all from different countries, all belonging to travelers who had gone missing over the past 5 years. Each passport was placed neatly, almost respectfully, as if the person collecting them believed this was a form of organization rather than a graveyard. At the bottom of the trunk lay something different, a notebook bound with worn leather. It was a journal, handwritten with disturbing precision. When Raghav opened it, he saw the name Arvind Solanki written on the first page. The entries inside were not emotional confessions. They were cold, methodical notes, documenting travelers who matched a specific profile. People who traveled alone, people who had flexible plans, people who had few relatives checking in daily, people like Maricel Varguez. What made the journal even more chilling was the timeline. The entry about Maricel was written 3 weeks before she bought her ticket to India. Her name was listed alongside a prediction of her arrival month, her likely chosen city, and even the type of guest house she preferred. The accuracy was shocking. It was as if someone had studied her online habits, travel searches, and social media patterns long before she decided anything herself. Raghav realized that Maricel's disappearance wasn't spontaneous. She had been selected and tracked long before she knew she would travel. This discovery pointed to a network far more advanced than anything he had encountered, a network capable of monitoring international travelers, manipulating their decisions, and guiding them into places where they could vanish without struggle or noise. The inspector immediately issued an alert for Arvind Solanki, but it was already too late. Arvind had disappeared. When officers searched his last registered residence, they found nothing but an empty room with a mattress on the floor. No clothes. No personal documents. No signs of forced escape. It looked as though he had walked out calmly, knowing he would not be found. Meanwhile, the case took an even stranger turn when Priya Nandesh, the cafe owner, received a small brown package one morning. It had no sender name, no return address, and no markings to indicate its source. She delivered it directly to Inspector Raghav, fearing it might be connected to the case. Inside the box lay a single item, a silver bracelet. It was delicate, engraved with the initials MV. Priya immediately recognized it. Maricel had worn that bracelet every day at her cafe table. Beside the bracelet was a faint scent, the same floral perfume found on Maricel's pillow the morning she vanished. There was no note, no message, nothing to indicate what the sender wanted. It felt less like a return of lost property and more like a chilling announcement that the people behind the operation knew the investigators' every move. For Raghav, this package was a warning. Someone was watching the investigation as closely as they had watched Maricel. Someone was confident enough to send an item directly to a witness without fearing consequences. Months passed, but no trace of Maricel was ever found. Search teams combed the riverbanks near the railway bridge, scanned forests, and checked abandoned buildings. But the trail always ended in silence. The only evidence that she had reached the bridge was the final camera recording. After that, she vanished completely, as if the air itself had swallowed her. The authorities concluded that she was likely taken by the same network that had claimed so many others. Yet without a body, without a confession, and without a single mistake left behind by the perpetrators, the case remained open. Even today, the image of her circled photo in the abandoned room haunts those who worked on the investigation. It serves as a reminder that someone, somewhere, had planned her fate long before she boarded her flight. And the bracelet sent to Priya sits locked in an evidence box, still holding the faint scent of the perfume that never belonged to Maricel. The truth of what happened to her remains hidden in shadows, controlled by people who move in silence and leave no footprints. And the most terrifying part isn't that she disappeared, it's that whoever took her is still out there, watching, waiting, and perhaps already choosing their next traveler who believes they are journeying alone.